The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm orange glow over the small village of Greydale. It was a quiet place, surrounded by dense forests and towering hills, where humans lived simple lives under the rule of the Elven Empire. For centuries, the elves had watched over them, looking down on the humans as little more than tools, useful but not worthy of respect. Finner Grayseaton was a simple man, living a simple life. He worked in the fields, tilled the soil, and did his part to keep the village running. The elves rarely visited Greydale, but when they did, it was with their usual air of superiority. Their leader, Queen Velia, had decreed that all humans were to remain obedient and never question the authority of the elves. Anyone who did would face swift punishment. Finner had grown up knowing that humans were meant to serve, not lead. But as he worked in the fields that day, something strange happened. As he dug his shovel into the earth, it struck something hard. At first, he thought it was a rock, but when he cleared the dirt away, he found a sword. It wasn't an ordinary weapon. The handle was covered in ancient markings, and the blade shimmered in the fading sunlight as if it had a life of its own. Finner's heart raced. He had never seen anything like it. Curious, he picked up the sword, feeling a surge of energy course through his body. The world around him seemed to fade, and for a moment, he wasn't just a farmer anymore. He felt different, stronger, more aware. He could hear the faint whispers of voices long gone, echoing in his mind. The sword had a power, an ancient power, and somehow it had chosen him. Finner stood there for a long time, holding the sword, unsure of what to do. He had no magic, no special training. He was just a simple man. But the more he held the sword, the more certain he became that it wasn't meant to stay hidden in the ground. It was meant for something greater. As Finner made his way back to the village, his mind raced with thoughts of what this discovery meant. Could it be possible? Could humans actually rise up against the elves? The idea seemed absurd at first, but something deep inside him told him it was more than just a dream. He wasn't alone. There were others like him, people who had lived under the elves' rule for far too long. They had been quiet, but they were waiting for something, waiting for a sign. And perhaps this sword was the sign they needed. That night, as Finner lay awake in bed, he knew the world had changed. He couldn't ignore the call to action that the sword had awakened in him. The time for silence was over. It was time to fight, not with brute force, but with the cunning, determination, and power that only humans could wield. The elves might have magic and centuries of history, but Finner knew one thing for certain: humans were more than they seemed. And the first spark of rebellion had just been lit. The village of Greydale was quiet once more, but the air was thick with a tension that hadn't been there before. Finner had barely slept the night after finding the sword. His thoughts kept racing, wondering what the discovery truly meant. Could this be the beginning of something bigger, or was he just a fool dreaming of impossible things? The next morning he made up his mind. He couldn't ignore the fire that had been sparked inside him. He had to act, and he wasn't going to do it alone. Finner gathered a few trusted friends, people who, like him, had grown tired of the elves' rule. They were mostly farmers, traders, and hunters, people who had lived their whole lives under the thumb of the Elven Empire. But in their eyes, Finner saw something he hadn't noticed before, the same longing for change that he felt. "Finner, you really think we can do something about the elves?" asked Rahl, a burly man who worked the fields beside him. He had never been one for rebellion, always believing the elves were too powerful to oppose. "What do we have?" "Nothing but pitchforks and plows." Finner held up the sword, letting the light catch the blade. "This changes everything. The sword has power. We don't need to fight them with what they expect. We have to use our brains, our knowledge of the land. The elves think they're untouchable, but they don't know us. They don't understand how we think, how we survive." Rahl hesitated, but the fire in Finner's eyes was convincing. Slowly, the other villagers gathered around, each nodding as they realized this wasn't just talk. It was a plan. Finner's heart beat faster as he looked at them. This was it. This was the start. Word of the rebellion spread quickly, and soon small groups of humans from neighboring villages began to join in. They were all tired of living under Elven rule. They had been treated like slaves, and some had even been forced into labor in the Elven cities. No more. They were ready to fight back. One evening, under the cover of darkness, Finner and his new army of rebels set out. They had learned that a small Elven patrol would be passing through the nearby woods. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They knew they had to send a message. If the elves didn't respect them, they would make them notice. The rebels hid in the shadows, waiting for the Elven patrol to come into view. As they passed, Finner gave the signal. The trap was set. His group moved quickly, silently. They surrounded the elves, catching them off guard. The elven soldiers were skilled in combat, but they weren't prepared for the humans' swift and unexpected attack. Finner and his rebels didn't rely on brute strength. They used the terrain to their advantage, leading the elves into narrow paths where their superior numbers and agility couldn't save them. The humans fought with determination, not because they were trained warriors, but because they had something the elves didn't: the will to survive and the will to fight for their freedom. By the time the elves realized what was happening, it was too late. The humans had already struck and vanished into the night, leaving behind only a few confused and defeated soldiers. It wasn't a victory of force, but of strategy. Finner's heart raced as he realized they had done it. The elves had been outsmarted. As the rebels gathered to celebrate, Finner looked out at the faces of his people, people who had never known true freedom, who had been told they were nothing. But tonight, they were something. They were a force. And this was only the beginning. The news of the humans' victory spread like wildfire. Whispers traveled through the villages, carried by wind, and reached the Elven Empire faster than anyone had anticipated. The elves, so confident in their dominance, were shaken. How could a small group of humans, without magic or training, defeat their soldiers? The Elven Empire, known for its ancient power and wisdom, had been embarrassed. Queen Velia, the ruler of the elves, stood in her grand hall, the stone walls lined with ancient tapestries depicting glorious battles and victories. Her expression was calm, but beneath her serene exterior, her mind was racing. She had ruled the elves for centuries, and no one had ever dared to challenge their superiority. Until now. How could this happen? Velia asked, her voice cold and sharp. She turned to her most trusted general, Thalinder, who had fought in countless battles and was known for his unmatched tactical genius. Thalinder stood tall, his long silver hair falling perfectly over his shoulders, his eyes narrowing as he considered the situation. "It's a mystery, my queen. We underestimated the humans. They are not as weak as we thought." Velia's gaze darkened. "I want them crushed. Immediately. These humans cannot be allowed to rise any further. If they are left unchecked, it could lead to chaos." Thalinder nodded, his expression serious. "We will send a strong force to deal with them. I will personally lead the campaign." In the following days, the Elven army, led by Thalinder, prepared to march toward the human villages. The elves were known for their skill in combat, their magic, and their precision. They were a force to be reckoned with. But Finner and his rebels had no intention of standing still and waiting to be crushed. Meanwhile, in the hidden caves outside Greydale, Finner and his band of rebels had been preparing. The victory against the Elven patrol had given them hope, but they knew that the elves would retaliate. They couldn't match the elves in strength or magic, but they had something the elves didn't: the will to outsmart them. Finner sat with his closest allies, going over their plans. "We know they'll come for us soon," he said. "But we're not going to face them head-on. We'll strike in ways they won't expect. We'll use their arrogance against them." Raoul, the burly farmer who had become one of Finner's trusted commanders, nodded. "We can't fight them like soldiers. We need to think like hunters. We know this land better than they do. We can use the forests, the rivers, the mountains." Finner smiled, feeling the weight of the sword at his side. He could feel its power growing within him, as if it was guiding him. "Exactly. We'll draw them into the places they least expect. We'll fight like ghosts, using their own overconfidence to trap them." The plan was risky, but Finner had no other choice. The elves were coming, and this was the only way they could stand a chance. As the humans prepared for what was to come, they knew they were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something greater. They were fighting to prove that they could no longer be treated as lesser beings. The elves had ruled for too long. It was time to show them that humanity was capable of far more than they had ever imagined. The rebellion had only just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. The air was cool and crisp as Finner and his group of rebels made their way through the dense forest. They had traveled for days, moving under the cover of night to avoid the elven patrols that scoured the land. The map Finner had found in the ancient library pointed to a hidden place deep within the forbidden forest, a place where the last remnants of humanity's forgotten power were said to be stored. It was a place no one had entered in centuries, and few even remembered it existed. The path was narrow, tangled with vines and thorns. The trees towered above them, their branches stretching out like the arms of giants. Despite the difficulty of the journey, Finner felt a sense of urgency pulling him forward. This was no ordinary mission. If they were to stand a chance against the elves, They needed to unlock the power that had once made humans a force to be reckoned with. The sword Finner carried had awakened something deep within him, but he knew that alone would not be enough. They needed more. Ralph, his closest ally, walked beside him, his heavy boots crunching softly against the underbrush. "How much farther?" Rahl asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Finner glanced at the map again. "We're close, just a little farther." As they walked, Finner couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest seemed alive, its every rustling leaf and snap of a twig sending a chill down his spine. He had heard stories of creatures that roamed these woods, ancient guardians of the old places, sworn to protect the secrets buried within. The group reached a small clearing, and at the center stood a stone doorway covered in ivy and moss. It looked like nothing more than a forgotten ruin, but Finner's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the entrance to the hidden place he had been searching for. They approached cautiously. Finner felt the sword at his side hum with energy, as if reacting to the ancient stone. The markings on the door matched those on the sword's hilt, and he knew they had found what they were looking for. The past and the present were converging. "What now?" Rahl asked, his voice low. Finner stepped forward and placed his hand on the door. A low rumble filled the air, and the stone began to shift. The vines and moss fell away, revealing intricate carvings beneath. Slowly, the massive stone door creaked open, revealing a dark passage beyond. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the scent of age and forgotten time hung in the air. The walls were lined with shelves, each holding old scrolls and artifacts that seemed untouched by time. But it was not the shelves that caught Finner's attention. It was the large, glowing stone at the far end of the room. It pulsed with a soft blue light, its surface smooth and cold to the touch. As Finner stepped closer, he could feel the power radiating from it. This was the heart of humanity, the artifact spoken of in the scrolls he had found. With a deep breath, Finner reached out and touched the stone. As soon as his fingers made contact, a rush of energy filled his body. His vision blurred, and he saw flashes of an ancient human empire, powerful, proud, and destroyed. The heart was a key to unlocking the true strength of humans, but it came with a price. Finner's heart pounded as he realized what he had to do. This was the moment that would change everything. He turned to Rahl, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting to reclaim what we lost." The future of humanity rested in their hands. The winds in the forbidden forest had shifted. Finner could feel it in his bones. The heart of humanity, glowing with ancient power, hummed in his hands. He had taken the artifact from the hidden chamber, but its weight was heavier than he had imagined. It was not just a tool, it was a symbol of everything humanity had lost and everything they now had the chance to reclaim. As the rebels gathered around him, they could see the change in Finner. His eyes were sharper, and his posture was more commanding. It was as if the heart had awakened something deep within him, a deep well of strength that he had never known existed. "We can't wait any longer," Finner said, his voice steady but firm. "The elves are coming. We need to strike before they get to us." Rahl, who had been by his side since the beginning of their rebellion, nodded. "But how do we stand against an army of elves, Finner? They have magic, they have power. We're just humans." Finner turned to Rahl, his gaze filled with resolve. "We've been underestimated for too long. A heart will give us the power we need, but it's not about brute strength. It's about outsmarting them. We have the knowledge, the land, and now we have the tools. We'll use their own pride against them." The rebels were silent for a moment, taking in Finner's words. Then, one by one, they nodded, their faces hardening with determination. They knew the risk, but they also knew they had no choice. The elves were coming, and if they didn't act now, there would be no tomorrow. The plan was simple, yet dangerous. The elves had sent a large force to march through the nearby valley, confident that they would crush any resistance. But Finner knew that valley well. It was narrow, surrounded by steep cliffs and thick forests. The elves would be vulnerable there. They wouldn't expect a counterattack. They wouldn't expect humans to know their land so well. As the sun began to set, the rebels moved into position, hiding in the trees and behind rocks. The faint sound of elven footsteps echoed through the valley. They were getting closer. Finner's heart raced as he watched the line of soldiers march past. This was the moment. With a signal, the rebels sprang into action. They used the terrain to their advantage, dropping rocks and debris onto the elves below, creating confusion and chaos. Then they struck. Finner and his closest allies led the charge, using the heart's power to enhance their strength and speed. The elves were skilled in battle, but they were not prepared for the ferocity and cunning of the humans. Finner's mind raced as he fought. He saw the elven soldiers, caught off guard by the human rebellion, struggling to maintain their composure. They were good fighters, but they were not used to being challenged. Finner knew they had to keep the pressure on. Every moment mattered. Rahl moved swiftly beside Finner, his axe cutting through the air as he knocked down elven soldiers one by one. The rebels worked together, each one playing their part, using the land to their advantage. The elves were confused, their pride and arrogance no match for the quick thinking and determination of the humans. As the last of the elven soldiers retreated, Finner stood at the edge of the valley, breathing heavily. His body ached, but the victory was undeniable. They had won. But Finner knew this battle was only the beginning. The elves would come again, stronger and more determined. But now the humans had proven something. They were not to be underestimated anymore. The rebellion had taken its first step toward victory, and the elves had learned the hard way. Humans were not so easily broken. The victory in the valley had left Finner and his rebels feeling a sense of pride they had never known before. For the first time in centuries, they had struck a blow to the elves, proving that humans were not weak or powerless. Word of their success spread quickly, reaching villages and towns that had long been under the control of the Elven Empire. More rebels joined their cause, eager to fight and reclaim their freedom. But the elves, though humiliated, were not foolish. They would not let such an insult go unanswered. In the Elven capital, Queen Velia stood before her council, her eyes cold as stone. The defeat in the valley had wounded her pride, but she was not one to be easily broken. She would crush this rebellion, and she would do it swiftly. "We will not let this rebellion grow," Velia said, her voice clear and commanding. "These humans believe they have power now, but they are nothing more than rats in the shadows. We will hunt them down, one by one, until they are nothing but a memory." Her general, Thalinder, nodded. "We will send an army to wipe them out. This time we will not be caught off guard." Velia's lips curled into a cold smile. "No, we will do something even worse. We will make an example of them. We will destroy their villages, their homes, and everything they hold dear. We will show them that they are nothing in the face of true power." While the elves prepared their revenge, Finner and his rebels did not rest. They knew the elves would come for them with all their might, and they had to be ready. The heart of humanity had given them power, but power alone was not enough. They needed to outthink the elves once again. Finner gathered his closest allies, Rahl, Jessa, and Nolan, and they sat around a campfire, their faces grim in the flickering light. "They'll come soon," Finner said, staring into the flames. "We can't keep hiding. We need to strike first. We know the land better than they do. We need to use that to our advantage." Rahl nodded. "But they'll have more soldiers this time. How can we outsmart an army?" Finner's eyes sparkled with a new idea. "We don't need to defeat their army head-on. We need to make them believe we are everywhere. We'll use decoys, distractions, and traps. They'll waste time hunting us down while we strike where they least expect." Nolan, a quiet and thoughtful man, spoke up. "If we spread them out, they'll have no strength left to fight. We can weaken them bit by bit." Finner smiled, feeling the weight of the heart at his side. It was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of everything they stood for now. They were no longer just farmers or traders. They were fighters. They were survivors. They were human. The next days were spent preparing. The rebels set up false camps, using smoke signals and campfires to trick the elves into thinking they were everywhere. They spread rumors of secret hideouts and hidden strongholds. When the Elven army finally arrived, they found nothing but confusion and chaos. The rebels were always one step ahead. But even as the humans' tricks kept the elves at bay, Finner knew that they couldn't keep running forever. The elves would learn. They would adapt. And when that day came, Finner and his rebels would be ready to face them head-on. The battle for freedom had only just begun. The days passed in a blur of constant motion. Finner and his rebels moved like shadows through the forests, never staying in one place for too long. The elves, though still frustrated by their inability to catch the humans, were relentless. Their army was vast, and their patience endless. Every day they grew closer to finding Finner and his band. The heart of humanity had given the rebels more than just courage. It had given them the tools to outthink their enemies. But as Finner gazed out over the horizon from the top of a rocky hill, he knew the time for tricks and distractions was running out. They couldn't keep hiding forever. The elves would eventually track them down. And when they did, there would be no escaping. Ral came up beside him, wiping the sweat from his brow as he surveyed the land. What's the plan now, Finner? The elves are getting closer. They've surrounded the northern pass. We can't go that way. Finner turned to look at him. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the valley below. He thought about the many battles they had fought, how each victory had been won not by strength, but by strategy. But now the elves were learning from their mistakes. They were adapting, getting smarter, and it wouldn't be long before they caught up. We can't keep running, Finner said, his voice quiet but firm. We need to make a stand. Ral raised an eyebrow. A stand? Against the elves? Are you sure? We have to, Finner replied. We've proven that we can outsmart them, but we need to show them we can fight too. If we don't, we'll always be hiding in the shadows. We have the heart now. It's time we use it. Not just for strength, but for unity. Ral nodded slowly, understanding the weight of Finner's words. He wasn't just talking about a fight. He was talking about a future. A future where humans weren't just surviving, but were free. As they gathered the rebels that evening, Finner spoke to them with urgency. The elves are coming. They think they can crush us, but they're wrong. We've been running long enough. We're going to take the fight to them. We'll meet them in the valley near the river. We know that land better than they do. We'll use the cliffs and the trees to our advantage. Jesso, one of the younger rebels, stepped forward. But they have magic. How are we supposed to fight them with our bare hands? Finner glanced at the heart of humanity hanging by his side. Its blue glow brighter than ever. We don't fight them with our hands. We fight with our minds. We've got to make them feel like they're surrounded, like they're trapped. We'll use everything we know to turn the valley into a maze. We know the land, and we'll use that to keep them guessing. The rebels murmured, nodding at the plan. They were scared, but they trusted Finner. After all, they had come this far together. That night, they moved into position, carefully avoiding the Elven patrols. Finner's heart pounded as he looked at the valley below, the place where they would make their stand. It was a place of memories, a place where they had once been hunted, but now it would be a battlefield where they would fight for everything they had lost, and for everything they hoped to gain. The storm was coming, and this time it wasn't the elves who would be in control. It was the humans. The valley was silent as the first light of dawn crept over the hills. Finner stood at the edge, overlooking the stretch of land below. The morning mist clung to the earth, wrapping everything in a ghostly quiet. His hand rested on the hilt of the sword that had become both a symbol and a weapon for the human rebellion. The heart of humanity pulsed gently at his side, its soft glow reflecting the first rays of sunlight. The elves were coming. Finner could hear the distant clatter of their armor as they marched forward, their steps steady and confident. They believed they would crush the humans without effort, that the valley would be another easy victory. But they didn't understand what was about to happen. Ral, standing beside him, glanced at the far side of the valley. It's time. They'll be here soon. Finner nodded. We've done everything we can to prepare. Now it's up to us to finish this. The rebels had worked tirelessly through the night, setting traps and creating barriers hidden in the thick woods and rocky cliffs. They had learned to use the land, just as the elves had relied on their magic. But this battle wasn't just about tactics. It was about proving something far more important. Humans were not weak. Humans were not to be dismissed. As the elven army advanced, Finner raised his hand, signaling the first wave of rebels to move into position. The ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet as the elves drew closer. Their silver armor gleamed in the sunlight, and their faces were expressionless, certain of their victory. But Finner knew that they were in for a surprise. The humans moved swiftly and quietly, like shadows in the morning mist. At Finner's signal, the rebels launched their first attack. Rocks tumbled down from the cliffs above, crashing into the elven ranks, creating confusion and chaos. The elves stumbled back, trying to regroup, but it was too late. The humans were already moving. Finner's voice rang out over the battlefield. Now, the rebels emerged from their hiding places, striking from all sides. They fought with speed and precision, making use of every hidden path, every rock, every tree. The elves, who had once looked down on them as nothing more than insignificant creatures, were now struggling to keep up with the human assault. The heart of humanity hummed with power as Finner led his group forward. Every swing of his sword felt stronger, more controlled. He could feel the energy coursing through him, giving him the strength to face the elves head-on. It was no longer just about the sword. It was about everything humanity had been through. They had been beaten down, but now they were rising. Ral's battle cry echoed across the valley as he charged into the heart of the elven forces. The rebels fought fiercely, not just to survive, but to prove that they were worthy of the world they had lost. Despite the chaos, Finner could see the fear beginning to show in the Elven ranks. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying the price. The elves had their magic, their speed, and their strength, but they did not have the one thing that the humans did, the will to fight for freedom. As the battle raged on, Finner knew this was just the beginning. There would be more battles, more struggles ahead. But today, the humans had proven they could stand toe to toe with the elves. They had shown the world that they were not to be dismissed. The rebellion was no longer just a spark, it was a fire, and it would burn until they were free.